All right. Well, we are live, guys. Thanks for waiting there. Luis, you just got in the last
Hey.
second.
Hey.
All right. Fantastic. Good morning.
Hey, sorry I'm late. I had to change my browser. Mozilla is not supported apparently, so I had to Internet Explorer. So it's the first time in my life I have to use it. So I'm really sorry to be late.
You should probably get out of this hangout now. You're not allowed to get in.
Yeah.
All right, so the idea is to talk a little bit about the blockchain, and I know you, Luis, had an agenda of topics to touch during the next hour.
Yep.
And some ideas. Maybe we can get started directly from there, and we'll keep watching on Twitter what messages and questions we might be getting and get the conversation started.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think maybe so everybody can understand, we should all present ourselves if it's not done already. So so I don't know, maybe Santi, you can go first.
Yes, I'm Santi Thiri. I'm founder and president of the DemocracyOS Foundation. We're a foundation that we started in Buenos Aires 3 years ago. We developed an open source software for online decision making called DemocracyOS. We started 3 years ago in Buenos Aires, Argentina. We also do a political party, the Next Party, and since we're open source, since we're civic technology, we do a lot of research on the blockchain. And since January 2015, we opened our headquarters in San Francisco. We receive support from Y Combinator, and to talk about the potential of the blockchain for democracy.
Awesome. Maybe Ethan, can you explain us a bit what you are doing with Eris and where you join us today?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Ethan. I'm the lead blockchain dev at Eris Industries. We're a small blockchain-based startup that is looking to start repurposing the technology underlying Bitcoin to be more prevalent across, or more useful across a spectrum of trust, of use cases for different levels of trust, right? Bitcoin feigns to be this almighty, completely trustless solution to a currency problem and to a shared database problem, but not every organization that wants to use the underlying technology needs to suspend as much trust as say Bitcoin does. And even in the case of Bitcoin, there's a huge implicit element of trust every time you download the source code, right? You're using the current SSL infrastructure to secure that transmission. So they're like all over the Bitcoin ecosystem. There are hidden little trust points that we tend to sort of ignore or gloss over. So the motivation behind Eris was to try and get a better handle on actually exposing where those trust points are and sort of providing tools all along the spectrum for businesses and governments, organizations to start using this blockchain technology, which is really just old distributed database technology, but with more parameters to tweak on where we lie on this trust spectrum or space or whatever you want to call it. So we've been working on just some tooling for firing up blockchain nodes and syncing between them, and like having multiple chains going at one time, and sort of starting to look at what the infrastructure is going to look like when you do have many chains and they're in some way supposed to be cognizant of each other, but you don't need them all running full nodes on to be fully know everything about each other the way sort of Bitcoin and side chains currently work. So it's still sort of experimental, but we're starting to lay out a pretty nice platform.
All right, awesome. I think we'll have time to go back through all the all the details you explained, because it became already a bit complex and a bit technical. So we'll try to really explain all these things so that everybody can understand us, even without any technical knowledge. So we'll come back to all these details, but yeah, that's pretty awesome. So Max, now can you explain just very quickly what NVB is about and what you're doing in it?
Sure. So my name is Max Kaye. I'm working on something called the Neutral Voting Bloc, which is or will soon be a registered political party in Australia, and it really has the main point of introducing liquid democracy via sort of elected proxies, essentially. So the underlying liquid democracy system is built on the Bitcoin blockchain, just using op-return transactions, and that's well, the minimum viable product is done. So cool.
Awesome, excellent. Thank you, man. And so, yeah, myself, I'm Louie Margot-Duclot. I'm a French student studying law, and I've been directing a research subject on blockchain politics. We developed a voting system using blockchain technologies to secure votes and to make a very scalable system that actually can evolve over time and can implement like new features as people vote for them, actually. So it's a voting system. You can vote for pretty much anything you want, but you can also vote for the way the voting system is working, and a bit like our institutions. You know, you can vote for laws, but you can also vote for how the law is passed. And so that's a bit what we're trying to do by using a distributed architecture and yeah, that's it basically. So I think we should start by just explaining in very simple terms what a blockchain is. Very firstly, so I don't know if you guys wanna give that a try, or.
Sure, I'll take a stab.
Always the challenge.
Sorry? Always a challenge, yeah. So an analogy I've been working with is the following. If the internet is like the pheromones in the sense of smell that bees use to communicate, the blockchain is like the protocol they use to coordinate themselves so that they can find the pollen and make the honey, right? So it's a protocol that sits on top of a communications layer, and that communications layer can kind of be abstracted away. We use the internet, bees use, you know, the sense of smell. But the important thing isn't the communications layer, it's what you do with it and how you coordinate agents above it, right? And the really amazing thing about bees is that they're able to coordinate without a so-called central controller, right? Even though there's a queen, the queen isn't really in charge of actually controlling what all the bees are doing and telling them what to do. They sort of have their own protocols, they go out and they cooperate with each other to do this amazing thing of making honey, right? And then we go and steal it from them. But the queen acts as sort of an incentive mechanism, as a way to incentivize all the bees to do this thing and to come back and, you know, to make the honey there and help her lay eggs and so on, right? And so in the same way, a blockchain is a protocol for coordinating large numbers of humans all over the globe, over the internet, to provide some useful service that no one in particular is in charge of. In this case, you know, in the case of Bitcoin, it's a global payments and currency service, right? And no one is in charge of that, and the blockchain is this protocol to get all these people and whoever wants to join to sort of participate in providing this service and in securing it. And so maybe that's a first pass definition of a blockchain by analogy.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Max, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so I think one of the more important points about blockchains and one of the reasons they work so well for people is the lack of trust that they provide. So it's not just a system of organization. It's a system of organization that we can't or that's not readily manipulable by bad actors. And so I think that's basically the only thing that I wanted to add to that.
Not a minor thing.
Not a minor thing, but implied by the fact that no one's in control of this, right?
Oh, yes, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Right, so typically, I guess, in society, control of something implies that other people are going to trust you to control it and to control it properly. And obviously, we've seen that go very terribly wrong, especially in the last century. So hopefully by having no one in control and by having protocols that are actually able to, you know, coordinate us to do amazing things, we can provide, you know, better governments and better social coordination and organization. So that's the
I guess
dream, right?
the corollary of that as well is that it's sort of like no one's in absolute control, but it's a very joint community effort. Like in some senses, everyone is in control.
Yes, exactly.
For better or for worse, as we're seeing, now with the block size debate.
Totally.
Sometimes that's difficult to deal with, but for the most, I think it's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, Santi, do you want to add something or?
No, I think I really like how the explanations of the blockchain evolve through time as we get to understand better the use of the different uses that we have. For me, it has always been, I always perceive the blockchain as a universal bureaucracy, like the bureaucracy to kill all bureaucracies. Historically, humans required, in order to trust strangers in a society, we always required for a third actor, a third large, very powerful actor to intermediate that trust for us. When we exchange a $10 note with a stranger on the street, we're both trusting the federal bank that sends that bill out there. And historically, all our institutions are basically big intermediators, big arbitrage machines of trust. And the fact that we can have a technology that is able to mediate trust automatically, decentralized around the world using the internet, I think it's a very powerful thing. I think it's a Wild West right there. We need to build a lot of the new kinds of institutions that are going to live in this kind of infrastructure, but the advantages are many, are very significant, and I think that it's up to the new generations that are building software to generate the ecosystem that can hopefully one day will render lawyers, notaries, I don't know, all kinds of bureaucrats irrelevant very soon.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. And I think basically there are two main things about the blockchain that we should really focus on with what we're trying to do here. You with DemocracyOS, Max with NVB, and Ethan as well. So two things. The first one is security. It allows us to have very secured transactions. You cannot fake them. So that's the main point. I mean, for the voting system we've been developing, that's the main point. It's like you can vote for anything, and you can make sure that your vote hasn't been hacked. That's the first point. I mean, if you have like a republic or a democracy where the voting system is not working, where you can hack the vote, well, then there is no democracy. And frankly, when we see what's going on with all the e-voting systems, all the scandals that we had, for instance, in the US, but also in France, in Europe, in Australia, there are scandals every time we make an election. So the first thing is, we could secure transactions, make sure they are valid and verified by a huge network of peers. And the second thing is maybe decentralization. Very simply, no one is in charge. So that's what you guys just said. But it's a common good. It's a shared space. It belongs to everybody. A bit like the internet itself. Nobody's governing the internet. We all are at the same time. And so it's a forum with it's a shared space with shared rules, and I think when you think of it a bit, it's a bit how our institutions work as well. Institutions are nothing but just a set of rules that we all have in common, and maybe we could use the blockchain to, I don't know, to create a new forms of institutions to redevelop the way we create mobilization, political mobilization online. And so when we combine those two aspects, like security and decentralization, you realize that the community has brand new powers. Powers to express itself, power to organize, and And yeah, third, it doesn't need anybody now. We always needed in all our political systems, we always needed a third man, and no, we don't need it anymore. So I think that's the biggest the biggest potential for a blockchain. So maybe we could explain very quickly how Bitcoin is working, and explain how different Bitcoin is from other types of blockchains. So so maybe Ethan, you can tell us how it's different, because you guys at Ares Industries are developing not another blockchain but other types of blockchains, and new ways for developers to create actually their own blockchains, and make them programmable. So maybe you can tell us a bit about this, and about how blockchain works more generally.
Yeah, absolutely. So Eris sort of takes this view of blockchains, that a blockchain is like it's like a shared good infrastructure as a service. You know, software is moving more and more towards providing offerings that are actually services, since all the software itself is going open source, right? So we have software as a service, platforms as a service, infrastructure as a service. With blockchains, we're starting to see something that could adequately be called shared goods infrastructure as a service. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a public good for it to be a shared good, right? Bitcoin happens to also be a public good. But sort of the potential that Eris sees in blockchains as shared goods is, well, it doesn't have to be a fully public system, but you could have a variety of agents who want to cooperate with each other on some task. They don't want to all duplicate the paperwork and the bureaucracy for dealing with the accounting and the different roles and responsibilities and so on, right? So rather, sort of as we've been alluding to, rather than counting on that that bureaucracy being implemented by each of these organizations, you use the blockchain as sort of a common universal bureaucracy. It's a great term, to deal with all that for them. And again, no one of them is in charge. I mean, you know, some people might not consider it decentralized because it's permissioned. So if I want to play, I can't necessarily play because, you know, it's only between these 5 guys. But for them, it provides this sort of central point of which none of them are in control, which is secure by virtue of the public-private key crypto and whatever mechanism you put in stake for updating, you put in place for updating the ledger. So this is where really the innovation behind Bitcoin really came out, is, okay, you have a bunch of people that are semi-untrusted or fully untrusted participating in a currency. You know, how are we going to make updates to the ledger where no one individual is going to be in charge, right? And it did so with a very clever economic game, such that updates to the ledger are only valid if they come with some proof that computational work was done, right? The so-called Bitcoin proof of work. And in the long run, proof of work, I actually have a lot of sympathy for proof of work, because I think it could be, once the hardware becomes commodity enough, and instead of, you know, thousands of dollars for an ASIC to mine Bitcoin, it's, you know, 10, 20, whatever, it's in your cell phone, which might be years down the road. Then it really is this sort of one CPU, one vote, or one human, one vote kind of philosophy, like Satoshi originally intended. The problem right now is you've got mining farms and this huge centralization imperative, such that effectively there are only like 3 people in charge of Bitcoin, just the guys in charge of the biggest mining pools, right? And at the same time, it's actually hugely significant or important to us that there's only 3 guys in charge. Because, for example, when a bug is found in the protocol, you only have to contact about 3 guys to coordinate fixing it, right? Like back in 2013, Bitcoin forked, and because there are actually only so few people really involved in coordinating the entire Bitcoin network, the miners, a couple developers, a couple big business owners, they were all able to find each other and figure out what to do and solve the problem and save Bitcoin, right? So there's always this sort of trade-off between centralization and decentralization and sort of dealing with crisis, in effect, and the anti-fragility of the system, right? And so what we're trying to work towards is a system of blockchains that isn't so much dependent on this one big proof of work chain. Well, and if it is, that there's only one proof of work chain, right? Because proof of work is really sort of wasteful. And once you have one of them, you don't need any others. You can sort of use that to secure many other chains. But these other chains can be based on what we call a proof of stake model, where instead of having to do computational work, you have to be a known public key that is allowed to validate blocks, right? And people then trust these validators, and there could be a large group of them, and the validation power could be distributed between them, much like some UN council or something, right? And there's veto power to the extent that you need at least say 2/3 of them to sign off on something. So these chains are much more efficient. It's much easier to work with them, to make as many of them as you want, to secure them without having to worry about proof of work, getting hijacked, and so on. But in the context of many other chains like this that can all sort of work together to build like a fractal pattern of somewhat locally or regionally oriented databases, right? So it's like, we don't all need to be using Bitcoin all the time. A lot of my commerce is going to be done in my city. I ought to be using something that's more locally based in my city that maybe somewhere along the line, will sync up with Bitcoin because maybe I need to send something to Japan, and that's how it'll work, right? So we're trying to work more towards that kind of a scalable proof-of-stake based infrastructure, maybe with some proof of work at the top, but where things are more sort of locally organized and bottom-up, and the trust that ends up implicit in the network can actually be community-based. You might actually know these people. You might be able to visit them, City Hall, whatever. So it's to sort of better integrate the political systems and regional political organization with these distributed database structures. I'll stop there because that was a ramble.
All right. Thanks, Ethan. You guys, do you want to add something?
I really like the approach to the proof of stake. I think that we need to find more creative uses of the blockchain, because if we're always relying on the proof of work chain, I think the costs of using the blockchain can be significantly high. And when it comes to online voting, there have been many different approaches around how the blockchain can be effectively used for online voting. One being, say, you distribute a set of tokens among many users, and then each user can send that token to a yes address or a no address. But eventually, each one of those transactions can have, due to the transaction cost of the blockchain, can be, for larger elections, can be extremely expensive. It's not a very cheap approach. So I've seen a lot of teams, trying to understand how to do online voting with the mechanisms that are put in place using the blockchain. But there are simpler mechanisms using cryptography that can easily be used and make it compatible with the blockchain. I think maybe the proof of stake approach sounds a very interesting approach to me. But also another key aspect is when you want to do online voting, the one key difference that makes voting different from a survey or a poll is that you have proper identity validation. So a key element for proper use of the blockchain, I think, especially when it's about governance issues, is proper identity validation. And in that aspect, there are some interesting startups working around that too.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, you mentioned there that it sort of like wasn't cheap, but I feel like, especially given that we do get identity verification, I think it's incredibly cheap. Even if you take like a 2-cent transaction fee and then multiply that over, say, Australia has like 11 million people in each election. That's only like, that's like a few $100,000 compared to what we actually spend on elections. That's really cheap. So this is even now in this immature form, it can still provide a fair amount of
My
incentive.
calculation though is 20 cents per transaction, and that gives us $1 million per election.
Yes.
It's still cheaper than elections done today for sure.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, actually, there are studies that have been made to evaluate the cost of the voting systems, and turns out that it's between $16, $17, and $30 when you go to like war zones and stuff. But yeah, between $16 and $30 per voter and per vote to organize an election. And I pretty much agree with Max on this one. Is that it's in a way it's pretty expensive to have to pay for each vote because you're using the Bitcoin system, and so you pay for every transaction basically. But on the other hand, when you compare it to the current solutions that the government implemented to allow us to express our opinions, you realize that there's the future on one hand and just solutions of the past on the other. So yeah, we could make, maybe by just lowering very much the cost of every vote, we could also multiply the times where everybody will be able to vote, and increase democratic expression, over time. So maybe that's a potential.
I've been sorry to interrupt, but I always have debates in Argentina, especially that it's a very reactionary ecosystem against electronic voting in general. You still feel this backlash against electronic voting as if the traditional system we use is not corrupt. But I do argue that it's way more corrupt than if we use electronic devices to make our election accountable. And that's the key advantage. The advantage is that if we lower the cost of voting, we can vote many more times, and we can drastically change the dynamic of society.
Right. I think that's a really important point. One of my major I don't have a problem with government per se, or a problem with leaders or leadership, right? I think that's actually integral to society. The problem is the way I guess every world democracy is oriented. You only really get to give feedback, every 4 years or something, where you cast a vote, and if it's first past the post, you hardly even make a difference, right? Typically. So for me, one of the great promises of this sort of electronic voting and using blockchains and so on is that we can get higher rates of turnover and higher rates of feedback on our elected officials and make it more of, say, a market-based system in politics, which is really what's lacking there. Any kind of incentive to that you'll get thrown out quickly, because they all basically know they're locked in for 4 years, right? So
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, like you mentioned first past the post there, and I think that touching on voting systems would be good here as well. We've been restricted in the past by pretty basic technology. Like every voting system that we've had, we need to be able to print on paper, we need to be able to distribute, people need to be able to use a pen, and it needs to go in a box. Whereas with electronic voting, we can get rid of a whole lot of those requirements, and so even the somewhat better voting systems like mixed member proportional or some of those, we don't have to, work under those same requirements anymore, and we can experiment with things like liquid democracy that have a really, like a strong requirement for interactivity with the community, but the payoff is then that so little work needs to be done to have an accurate election. And so I feel like it would almost be sad to try and embrace blockchain technology, but then to just run first past the post on the blockchain. Like that we're gonna find new ways of voting and organizing ourselves. These new ways, I think that everything is gonna as we learn more about this, we're gonna find how naturally things are gonna slot in, and we'll be able to experiment.
I'm very interested in liquid democracy, proxy voting. Can you tell us a little bit more, Max, about what you've been working on that field?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Delegate of Democracy has been an idea that's been around for, I think, a few decades now, but never really, not made nearly as hard and fast as some of the other voting systems out there. The idea is that every time a ballot comes up for any sort of what would normally go before the parliament, if we start from the framework of direct democracy, where everything is put to the people and everyone votes all the time. Liquid democracy is basically an extension on top of that, where you can say you can vote all the time if you want to, but you can also just set a delegate as well. And then whoever you choose to follow, whoever that delegate is, then if you don't vote, then your vote just does whatever they do. And you can have long chains of delegates. So I could delegate to a community leader who delegates to, like a state leader, and then a national leader perhaps. And in this way, we can sort of have a very dynamic graph overlaid over the voting system that allows efficient redistribution of votes without much work. And then as long as you don't have any restrictions on changing a delegate, like every 3 years or anything like that, if you can change it every day, then you have a very reactive power structure as well that is able to react to the circumstances of the time and the behavior of the representatives that end up holding a fair amount of power. Is that a reasonable overview?
Is that being implemented at any level anywhere, or can you tell us?
Yeah, so I've built an implementation that runs on top of the Bitcoin blockchain to do just this now. I mean,
politically though, is anyone actually using it?
No.
Okay.
I mean, oh well, yes. So the Pirate Party, many of the pirate parties around like Europe and the world use it internally, but it's not being used in a like a public sense, in the same way that we consider normal democracy.
Sure.
So, or not that I know of. There may be somewhere in the world that uses it, but I don't know of it.
Yeah, that'd be pretty amazing. So I mean, this comes back to a classic problem that I'm always wrestling with, which is the difference between, like what we want in theory and what is practical today with current socioeconomic organization and, the current momentum we've had of whatever the last 100 years. And the sort of my criticism of the Bitcoin ecosystem to some extent is that we're all these like happy-go-lucky anarchist libertarians who think Bitcoin is like gonna bring us free to this land of libertarian utopia, but the world's not ready for that. And in the meantime, we still have governments and fiat currency and banks and all this stuff, right? And we're not going to be able to just leap into this crypto economic utopia like tomorrow, even though some small communities may be able to do that. If you only got 150 people, then why the hell not? If you're all programmers, you could all probably live off Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
something like this, right? But in the meantime, we have to take a long, probably a very long series of short steps to sort of start integrating not just blockchains, but the whole, cryptographic culture into society, right? I mean, if the net result of like all this flurry of work we're doing on blockchains is just that the global professional culture becomes more cryptographically, savvy, then that's a great boon, right? If everyone just has sort of more appreciation or recognition of what a private key is, how to use one, how to protect one, right? Why, like where they can use it, and that adoption starts picking up for that, and that's going to go a long way, especially to a lot of these voting systems, even if we don't involve the blockchain, right?
And that's a huge challenge. I once talked with a representative of the British government on what was on the Defense Department and what was their policy regarding digital security, and that the policy that they are approaching is that in this day and age, digital security has the policy from the government, at least from the UK perspective, has a lot to do with the policy they had on hygiene, personal hygiene in the late 19th century, in the sense that in the late 19th century, when pipes were connecting cities and you had suddenly water closets and faucets, you had to educate the entire population about how to take care of your bathroom, about your privacy, about your personal hygiene, to be hygienic with the other. And cryptography is the hygiene of our computers. Cryptography, the way we take care about our private matters, in the same way like the bathroom did in our homes. And I think that layer of consciousness is definitely not there yet. We're a very tiny minority of our populations right now, but it's up to our responsibility to raise awareness about the importance of cryptography and how empowering it can be to society.
Totally. So, I mean, one of the things I love about blockchains is forget about all the distributed consensus stuff. They're forcing a sort of retooling and a reconceptualization of all these crypto primitives that are being put into practice. All this new software is coming out and being audited, and the Bitcoin developers find bugs in OpenSSL and they implement elliptic curve algorithms faster than have been implemented before. Right? There's a whole flurry of research in crypto just because of these new kinds of distributed databases, and that's going to be huge moving forward. Yeah. The question is how are we going to actually be able to get governments to start issuing private keys with whatever other national birth card or whatever they issue to track individuals. I mean, that's going to be the big next leap to actually make this.
I'm still doubting if we need the governments at all. I'm still doubting that.
Well, okay, so I don't necessarily believe we need governments either, but in the meantime we have them, right? So it's a classic case of given A, how do we do B, despite the fact that we shouldn't even do A, right? There's a constant political battle that everyone has to reckon with. So, given that we have governments and we're not just going to topple them tomorrow, how are we going to do proper identity vetting? We need to build up reputation systems, but look how well the Web of Trust works, right? No one uses the Web of Trust. Everyone uses public key infrastructure. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it's my fault. But from the technical community, I think that one of the challenges I perceive is that we need to develop or build certain standards, like standards on top of the blockchain. The blockchain is already a great standard out there, but certain standards of what do we mean when we mean a vote, when we mean a delegation of a vote, when we mean like these contracts that we can build on top of it, and having specifications that we share it can be very empowering for the whole blockchain ecosystem and the industry behind it. And I think that we're still very green on that aspect. At least that's my perception of it.
Yeah, I think here there are two things we should take into account, because you guys are talking about using this new bureaucratic model, which is the blockchain, within governments, to make governments which are like big paper democracies, sorry, bureaucracies. Yeah, me, I made that mistake again, but yeah. So governments are big bureaucracies, paper-based bureaucracies, and so the huge potential, like over the long-term perspective, would be that they start using blockchains, and that's true. I mean, the U.S. government passed like maybe 20,000 regulations last year. 20,000 regulation a year. That's absolutely huge, And if you think of them as contracts, because that's the case, It's like legal documents, it's legal contracts. You think that, yeah, well, there is absolutely no management system for it. I mean, there is one, but it's all paper based and it's all so archaic. So yeah. Anyway, it's a huge machine, and it would be way more efficient using a blockchain. So, but the thing is, we could also use in a very first place, we could also use blockchains just to foster public mobilization. Not use it in governments, because the inertia we get in governments to make a change in this huge machine is so big. I mean, we'll have to wait decades before they even start thinking of using blockchain technology in their internal systems. I mean, maybe not, because there are smart people, they see the potential and they probably use it, but the time they will need to change mentalities, change the use of all their employees and public servants. I mean, it will take time. It will take time. But in the meantime, what yeah.
Sorry, just a footnote. I want to add a footnote. I have one case recently, 2 weeks ago. The government of Canada used proofofexistence.com, which is a very nice service done by an Argentine programmer to certify an official document of the government of Canada using the blockchain. Proofofexistence.com is developed by Manuel Arauz. He's a brilliant Argentine programmer. It's an open source project to do certification, notary certification of documents using the blockchain. And as far as I know, the first government to use it was Canada. So, woo! One document.
One on
the start.
Yeah, it's a start.
These guys are very much in advance, and I have to say that's pretty impressive. But I was talking more about like using blockchains in the core of the government. Like the core of the government is how they pass laws, how they create regulations, and how they actually make the legal authorization for a public servant to execute an act. And that's the big core of a state, and I think it will take us like a huge amount of time before governments start using blockchains for that core that core activities. Passing laws and authorizing public servants to actually accomplish legal actions. And so that's what blockchains allow us, is just finally just a huge user management system, and we manage permissions. Like this guy here that we identified is allowed to vote because he's a citizen, b accomplish certain actions because he's granted by the power to accomplish them, etc., etc. But back to what I wanted to say in the first place. I mean, this will take time to move all these innovations in the administration, in our governments. and some people will argue that we don't really have that time, and that in the meantime, in this time frame in between now and that moment, we can just start using it by ourselves, you know, and change the model, because the whole point in this is just to kill the third man, and in a way, you know, government are third men, and they do pretty much they do pretty well. I mean, they're pretty the job is pretty well done, but still, you know, we can why delegate something that we can do by ourselves, you know, and that's, I think, where the true potential of blockchain technology resides, is that it's an institution by itself. You know, the blockchain technology is an institution. It's not owned by anybody, and it's driven by consensus. And exactly as you know, a republic is. You know, a nation is just like the sovereign nation will enact a constitution, and this will just create a set of rules that everybody shares. And here we can just share the rules that are like just user permissions in IT terms, a user permission management system. And that's pretty huge. I mean, you don't need anybody to tell you if you're allowed to vote. I mean, you're a citizen, you have the right to vote. And if you get elected, or if by the liquid democratic system you get to represent other people's votes, well then, you know, you just express yourself, you know, and nobody can stop you from doing that. And so I think, of course, there still remains some legal challenges. For instance, to create like organizations that work on that basis. But I think, you know, we don't need to wait for governments to make that move. We could just like use it, create an organization, create like a political movement, political parties, and yeah, starting using it. And maybe as a last point, you know, we see all over the world movements of citizens that just express their dissatisfaction towards the governments, towards the way they are represented. And I'm not saying that direct democracy or liquid democracy would be a good or a bad thing on these expressions, but I just see that worldwide there is a movement against representative democracy, because these guys, sometimes they do the job well, sometimes they don't, and I really feel like this global community, because there is a global community that is growing and growing, and that was born in maybe 20 years ago. I think that this global community can be structured by a blockchain technology. I think it's the only way to have all these people agree on something, and making sure that everybody agreed on it. And so I think that's the main point. And if we realize that, we'll realize that the huge political power we can get from a blockchain technology. So that's my view. Yeah. I don't know if you.
That's the revolutionary speed from.
No, I quite agree with that. Especially, I mean, especially talking about like the idea of incremental solutions before, and then what you were just saying about the idea of not needing to wait. I feel like the massive potential of blockchains is, or at least if they do really have, like, if they really are that great for society, then we should be able to figure out like an organization or a structure or something that uses a blockchain that is more competitive than our current governmental systems. Like, we should be able to create something in parallel that actively outcompetes governments. And so we might see this not as, like, obviously, you know, this is a problem to deal with from as many fronts as possible. So we have, like, you know, in parliament type stuff. But we might see that governments actually just become superseded, and citizens prefer to essentially be under the governance of a more, like, a bigger sort of pseudo-structure that gives them more back, that provides more services than their actual real government. And so we might just see the fading away of government and the I guess the creation of some other thing.
So the problem is our blockchains no blockchain to date has been backed by a military, and basically every government is. So that's what we're going to be going up against, and that's the troubling thing. So, you know, and I say this all the time when I talk to people about how we're going to bring on blockchain-based governance and sort of phase out the old government. We have to give them a way to step down gracefully so that they don't go out shooting, right? That's what we want to avoid at all costs. It's like, say, the American military feeling like they've been backed into a corner and they need to go to civil war against the people because, you know, they're governing themselves using blockchains or something like this, right? And that's probably a real threat to them because they want to stay in control. So we need to be. There are so many factors to dealing with this problem that, you know, it's very difficult to take it all into consideration. But I think we need to sort of be careful to give them a way out before we really let this thing take over, right? So that we don't find ourselves not having a military and unable to. But maybe the blockchain will enable us to coordinate to print the 3D guns we need to take on the military, whatever it ends up being, right? Because I mean, yeah, exactly. So, like the way I see it, for almost all of history, violence and military struggle has been a necessity simply because we weren't able to coordinate trade on the scale we are able to today, right? And if everyone is trading and doing, you know, happy, positive, socioeconomic interaction with each other, there's no need for war, right? There's really no need for violence. It's just like outliers instead of the main thing that everyone is doing, right? So obviously, I think a lot of people have made the conclusion that, wow, if we move to a blockchain-based society, you know, there's going to be much less war, if only because we can't print money out of thin air to pay for it, right? Which is how all the wars have been paid for the last, like, 40 years or something like this. But meanwhile, if we leave ourselves without, sort of against the militaries of the nation states, we're going to have to be careful. So this is why I sort of prefer a viewpoint that as much as our governments are incredibly slow, by sort of, you know, lighting a little bit of a fire under their ass and showing them that we're capable of outcompeting them, but not necessarily doing it full force and bringing on, you know, their military might, is sort of maybe a more practical approach to actually getting where we want to, right? I mean, but who actually knows? Like, the future's impossible to predict. We're due for a regime change in a number of these countries any day now. So
I think it's interesting that the countermeasure to physical force has always been like brute force of intelligence, and the rise of modern computing has to do with Turing's need to find a way of breaking the Enigma machine of the Nazis. So I think that we might not see an army for the blockchain, but the core thing that keeps the blockchain strong is its enormous computational capacity. It's the single largest, most powerful network of computers in the world right now, and that's a level of force that makes the blockchain very, very hard to hack, very hard to attack, and what keeps it strong. Any of the other, you know, military force.
As true as that is, though,
it's force today.
If you consider the budget of, you know, say a large military, say the American military, whatever, I mean, taking on Bitcoin would be a tiny, minuscule fraction of that budget, right? For a couple $1 billion, you could completely beat out 51% of the mining power, and, you know, these guys are spending trillions. So from the level of nation states, we're still kind of pathetic, right? I mean, it's almost like the way when Bitcoin was being proposed as a medium for donating to WikiLeaks back in 2010 or whatever, when PayPal and Visa were refusing to send donations. Satoshi warned, you know, it's too early for that. It's too early because if we attract that kind of attention, they're going to destroy us, right? And so it's kind of like the same thing, maybe at not as much of extreme, but as we go along, we sort of need to continue to sneak ourselves in so that before they know it, we've taken over, and, you know, and then we can move from there instead of having this big old, you know, classic confrontation that so many of the, you know, the passionate Bitcoiners are excited to see. I mean, granted, I'm excited to see it too, but like I say, I'd rather let them step down gracefully because they have a shit ton of ammo.
Yeah, no, I've got faith that there is a good non-violent solution out there. Like, it seems it would be terribly ironic for the universe to somehow require, once we've got to this, you know, the information age and we've invented, you know, this blockchain thing, that somehow we still need violence, and there's just no other way around it. Like, I don't believe that. I definitely think there's a way forward.
I agree.
as we all do, evidenced by being here. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, but frankly, I don't think competing with the state necessarily means that we have to go to war against it. The thing is it's I think on a very very short term perspective, let's just build a consensus political system which is global, because of course most of the political issues that concern us, maybe not most of them, but a lot of political issues that concerns us on a global, and that's maybe why people are so pissed at our governments, is that they understand that they are weak in the sense that they are limited, limited to certain areas, a certain portion of territory, and outside this territory, oh no, on just the other side of the line, I can't do anything,
Sure.
and that's maybe the problem, and that's a huge problem that can be solved with with this kind of new political mobilization. But yeah, I think we just create a political organization, a legal organization, that will be based on consensus methods based on the blockchain.
And it can be a global
And
organization.
sorry.
And I mean, it can be even a global organization beyond any borders, and the challenge is to build citizenship for that kind of representation.
Yep, exactly. Because you have a global citizenship. I mean, it's not known very well, but like you have international conventions that recognize them. You have a global system of law. It's not called global, but it's a global system. It's called the international system. It's the UN, but to me, it's not working that well. And I'm not talking about reforming the UN or like taking over the power of other states, but just create a community around the globe, that just or a community first that will be structured by a common organ that will just represent the interest of the global community. These are big words, these are big words, but today there is absolutely no political organization that stands for the protection of the global interest. Nobody stands for that. And I think we have a competitive advantage here. We can do something if politically we can do something, if we can find a political niche, that's the one, because it doesn't exist anywhere in the world, and we should do it and allow people to vote directly for that organization. I mean, I would be really pleased to be able to vote for the UN Secretary General. You see what I mean? But the problem is, no, you cannot today. You cannot organize global scale elections. That's not possible. And with blockchain technology, maybe you can.
I think if we look throughout history, first representation was mostly based on blood. The kings, and they were through inheritance and limited to feuds. And eventually we had the French Revolution, and representation was based on territory, and today we pick representation based on the mayor of the city or the congressman of the nation. And now, as we are connected through the internet, I think that the kind of representation that we can build peer-to-peer in a global scale is representation based on knowledge, based on information. That's the environment that we're moving in with the internet. And I think that certainly it's not about making a better European Union or a better United Nations. Those are top-down institutions that were the consequence of complex process of history. But I think that the real challenge is for us to even take the daring step of each big revolution, each big shift in the kinds of representation throughout human history had a milestone, like a key moment. It was probably the Magna Carta or the American Revolution or the Bill of Rights, and maybe we should think about a blockchain Bill of Rights or a blockchain Magna Carta, and get started from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree, and that's why I mean I think we should focus ourselves on the legal perspective, on the legal challenges that this kind of environment allow us. Um, I mean that's what I've been trying to do with my little team back in France and here in Australia. But yeah, I mean the problem is a legal problem. You know, it's never a technical problem. And we see that every time the government try to implement new electronic systems for procedures they used to do on paper based. You know, you see every time that the problem is not a technical problem. The problem is just people don't want this change to be implemented. You know, they don't want these rights to be granted. They don't want you know they don't want the world to change in a way, and so we should focus on the legal challenges that we have towards the future. And these legal challenges, I mean, Max, you've been dealing with a few of them with the system you try to implement. For instance, yeah, how to lie people to respect the votes of the community. So I think, I mean, maybe if you want to say a word on this.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the issue that I was running into in this case was that I wanted to contractually bind senators, so particularly the neutral voting bloc, for various reasons, works particularly well in the Australian Senate, as well as a few state upper houses. And I wanted to contractually bind senators' behavior so that they would always have to vote the way that the blockchain, or the tally of the blockchain votes ended up. But the problem is that going back, more than 100 years, there's laws in place that take it as if a contract would bind senators or representatives' behavior, then it's a priori against the interest of people. And so there's a really strong status quo there about what or the ways that we're able to organize ourselves, and some of the assumptions about the ways that the tools that people use and what they can be used for, and that particularly misses out on the benefits of, say, being like using contracts to stitch some software into Parliament. So I think there is going to be a lot of these sort of, I guess, problems of inertia that have been, these decisions have been made for various reasons in the past that simply don't hold, or at least we didn't realize that it wasn't the whole scope. And so now we've created a rule that it sort of extends a bit too far and makes sort of the upgrade process a bit more difficult. You can also look at it from the other perspective and say that it's a defense mechanism, and that it keeps the established hierarchy in power. So I mean, those sort of things, I feel like we'll come up with interesting solutions and ways to get around it, and particularly as well once we start to see these sorts of ideas working, especially if there's like just one sort of like national political sort of example from anywhere around the world. Once we start to see those sort of these sort of systems working, then we might develop more of an interface for stitching software into government, which we obviously don't have now. And so it would be really nice if there was an option on your ballot that instead of electing a person, you could elect, like a liquid democracy algorithm essentially, and then just have whatever the algorithm spits out as your essentially the vote in Parliament. And those sort of systems, I think, are quite nice. They're quite elegant because they work in a very backwards compatible way. You can build it up within the existing system, and then when you've already reached a point of stability, you can strip away the layers that we don't need anymore, and reveal sort of like, I guess, perhaps in some ways a less hierarchical but more representative system that then can take on a new shape and can continue to evolve. And so I feel like those sort of systems where we don't require permission, where we can build it up within the existing system, and then only once we've tested it and when everything's mature, then we can strip it away. That I think is a lot more appealing as well, simply because there's no potential like failed hard fork as such. I mean, I would say like a change of governmental institutional system in a country is essentially like a hard fork in Bitcoin, and as we know with Bitcoin, you want a lot of testing, you want a lot of review, you want a lot of discussion, you want to make sure that it all goes well. And with these this sort of like build it up from the inside model, we can do all that before we actually go live in a very constructive manner where we still get the benefits of these sort of new voting systems as well. But all these sort of problems I think will be solved, but they're probably not going to be the next step. There's probably going to be a few steps before that, before we actually get to the point where we're happy to elect some software instead of a person to represent us.
A piece of advice that the founder of the Pirate Party once gave me is that politics usually move at glacial speed, extremely slow speed.
Yes.
Wait for a generation to die for the new generation to take over. We had a very similar approach with the Net Party in Buenos Aires. We ran for elections in 2013. We got 1% of the votes with the same concept of having not an algorithm. I wish we could have candidated an algorithm, but our candidate was committed. His entire political will was tied to this promise of always voting according to the software, to DemocracyOS. And I agree, it's a big challenge. One of the things, I launched it here in my phone. We're working on some prototypes, making some quirky experiments on the blockchain. I wanted to show you guys this. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but this is a very simple prototype of establishing delegation agreements using the blockchain. Storing these agreements on the blockchain. And a delegation of votes. It's a contract where you put an identity here, you put the identity of the delegator and the identity of the delegate, and you basically define topics and certain conditions, and everyone signs, and that's it. And we're toying with this user experience also, because we need to find user experiences that are connected to what people already believe that they're putting their trust on. And that's
Yeah, I feel like user experience is actually going to be one of the things where, democracy has traditionally had a big problem with user experience. I don't know about the voting systems in other countries, but in Australia, our Senate elections are a nightmare because we end up printing a sheet that's like literally a meter long and it has 150 names on it. And you only have two options. You can either, there's like a list of parties at the top, or all the people below, and so they're referred to as above or below the line. You can either put one number above the line, or you can fill in all 150 below the line. Right. So it's either you can just give your vote away to a party, or you've got an elaborate thing, and there are, you can make like one typo or out of order thing. Otherwise, your entire vote is made invalid. Right. And it's like this is not how a sophisticated internet-enabled society should be dealing with these sorts of issues, by sending out a meter-long section of paper where you have to give old people magnifying glasses because they literally can't read the names. Like, it's the arguments that electronic voting is somehow, far inferior to paper voting, I think is just nonsense. They definitely have a different set of problems, but the user experience of both has a lot to improve on. But we've already plateaued with paper votes. We've got a long way to go with electronic voting.
For sure. Yeah, we solved the Senate voting problem in Canada by just having our Senate be appointed, so we don't have to worry about voting.
We're just like, screw this whole election thing. We're just like, can someone just make a decision? What is the House of Lords look great? Let's do that.
But in the meantime, they really like Bitcoin, so it looks like that's working out for us.
Yeah. Well, the good with the bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and Santi, did you encounter like some legal problems with the Partido de la Red, or with the foundation in general?
I found the kinds of problems I found are beyond legal. One of the stories I share about the Net Party is that we used to have a troll, a very crazy troll. And one day I approached this guy because he was saying, in the middle of the campaign, he was saying incredible lies about me, about all the other members of the Net Party. And when I reach this guy, he tells me, "Why don't you give me a call? My phone number is 150-0000." And that phone number cannot be real. So I actually gave a call to that phone number, 150000. Actually, it was 156000. And the guy replied, and he asked me for a bribe for a federal judge. He worked for the spy agency of my government. He was following us, building a case against us. He tried to see if I was willing to pay a bribe. And that's when we realized that, holy shit, we're really bothering someone. That is hiring trolls, and he's putting a spy on us, and he's trying to get me on tape accepting a bribe for a federal judge, and he had information about what judge was the one that could actually get our party approved. So it was, Argentina is a very corrupt country. I'm very sad to say this. We have Messi on one side. We're a country that's able to produce Lionel Messi, but on the other side, the whole corruption scandal of the FIFA also has to do with the responsible guy of football in Argentina. So we are this extremely weird place that has incredible talent and incredible levels of corruption, and sadly, that's the kind of things that I think that made the Net Party feasible. I think that in Argentina, the whole explosion of the Bitcoin ecosystem has been very interesting to watch, since we have very high inflation, and our entire financial system is a clearly expression of how corrupt the country is. But that's what makes Bitcoin, blockchain, the Net Party, DemocracyOS feasible ideas that actually make sense in that kind of ecosystem. So I'm actually very, I pay a lot of attention to what's going on in countries that are facing strong political processes in emerging nations, because I think it's very likely that we're going to have like the Arab Spring. We're going to have our first big surprise about the impact of these technologies in some of these countries. Like it can be Argentina, it can be Venezuela, it can be Spain, I don't know, it can be Greece. But I think that we really need to pay attention to these places, because these are the places that have more to win with these technologies than with established institutions.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you on that point. I mean, obviously, parties like Podemos or Syriza are like, very horizontal parties could benefit a lot from these technologies, and that's why I think what you're doing, Santi, with DemocracyOS is great, because it's a very simple app. It's very simple. I mean, it's very popular. People get the thing like pretty instantly, and if we can find a way to use the benefits of the blockchain to be implemented on this platform, I think it could really make a huge political change, if you get to a government and say like, we have these thousands of people who agreed on something, and you have absolutely no proof of saying us that that's a fake, like if you can prove that the consensus, the legal document, or the document, or the proposition that this whole party or this whole population has agreed on is absolutely secured, then it has a true political weight. And so yeah, it would be I mean, it would be really interesting to follow up that what's going on your side, like, and your side, I mean, on all you guys' sides, because also, like, with what you guys doing with Ares as well, I mean, it's fantastic. You can just use the Bitcoin architecture to secure these things. But if you cannot create anything or any software in this, because, like, Bitcoin blockchain is pretty rigid and it's pretty hard to modify, well then what's the point? So I think it would be like super interesting to follow up what's going on. Maybe if you guys have last propositions, last things before we can end the discussion.
One of the last things I wanted to say is, last point on the agenda here is, why is it a good idea worth its monumental costs? And I do think that this is, like, it's no one's, here is, I think, deluded enough to think this is going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of work involved. But the biggest thing that the blockchain offers us is, I think, a type of government that has, the quality of universality, that it can be a government for all people, and that we don't need, or we will never need to change it again, that we can create a system that will scale beyond our society today, perhaps to a bigger society on this planet or a multi-planet society, that we can, using a blockchain, we can make decisions in a secure manner, separated by hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and that we can still run a government on that. And I think that that's definitely something that we cannot do today, and that the biggest reward from blockchain-based governance will be universality.
Absolutely. Amen. Just to follow quickly on that, I think that we should start small, obviously, and see how these kinds of technologies can have an impact in our local organizations, in the organization of the flat we might be living, in the organization of our community, of the school board. If we can start building this culture from the bottom up, peer-to-peer, it eventually it will be like planting a seed, and the tree will eventually grow. In our experience, we started 3 years ago with the Net Party and DemocracyOS, and for us it has been exactly that. It takes time; it's a very long process. But with the Net Party, we started in Buenos Aires, and now we have communities around the same idea in different countries. In different cities in the country. And it's this oral transmission of these concepts, of this idea, and I think for me at least, understanding the blockchain took me a lot of time, a lot of reading, research. One thing that I'm happy about getting into this whole world is that when I started with Bitcoin, it was a curiosity, but that led to a lot of new knowledge, new ideas, new connections, and a very global conversation. And I think that it's up to the task of our generation and the generations that are coming after us to build that new world, to build that new kind of citizenship. And I think that we're going to see in our lifetime incredible transformations in the same way that we saw incredible transformations in the last 25 years with the internet.
Yeah. I pretty much agree with a huge part of what you just said. We'll try to make it happen. And maybe what if you guys have something to say to the audience? Maybe like we didn't get any question from the audience. Maybe that's a shame. But if you guys would like to, sorry what?
We got some on Twitter, but I've been replying. But
like what would be your needs? What do you guys need? What do you want the audience to do? Or what would be your needs on that side?
So if if my interpretation of what you were saying is right, then it's an invitation for a plug. So if the audience if there are any Australians out there who are inspired by this sort of thing and would like to lend a hand or lend some support, then the Neutral Voting Bloc is not yet a registered political party, which means we need 500 plus people. So if you're interested in becoming a member, then our website is nvbloc.org. So thanks.
Excellent. I think the message just passed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think if you guys don't have anything more to say, I think we can end the discussion. I'll be really happy to continue this kind of talks, and I think it's the plan on your side, guys. So I think we'll have a lot to talk about with the economics of the blockchain, and that's pretty much a big point, because of course Bitcoin is a monetary system. So maybe we can yeah, we can book another time for discussion. And if you guys, if anybody in the audience have questions, want to say anything more, let's meet on Twitter. Let's continue to talk on this. And yeah, thanks a lot, everybody.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Good.
This is the first of many conversations. Let's keep the
Let's hope so,
conversation going
yeah.
on Twitter. And
I
yeah,
hope
thanks
so.
everybody. Super stimulating.
Cheers. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, see you next time.
Very global. Many times.
Ciao.
As it should be. All right, guys. Have a great weekend. Se finí. Espero que les haya gustado.